everyone, it's Raghu, and I'm back with Mindrolling, and today I have a wonderful gentleman that I'm going to get to know along with everybody else, Kazu Haga. Namaste.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you. So, Kazu, he does a few different things, but he has this wonderful book, Fierce Vulnerability, and I think there's some really juicy and important topics and themes here that we can get into. So, I'm happy that you're here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think we want to, so in terms of, your work and what you've been doing, it's very much involved with social action, way much involved with what goes behind all of what makes up social action in terms of actually coming to a place where you as an individual are taking social action first or alongside of social action with other people. So really powerful stuff. But tell us about you. Like, how did you even come to any of this stuff? Where did you grow up, and how did you come to this as a developing person?
Yeah, well, it's a long journey.
Years?
There's a lot of stories that I could tell, but I was born in Japan.
We love stories, so please.
Oh, I could go on. Yeah, I was born in Japan and moved to the U.S. when I was 7. And my journey into this kind of work in particular starts when I was 17 years old. I was in a pretty bad place in my life.
Uh-huh.
I actually dropped out of high school when I was 15. I never went to college. I came from a household that had a lot of abuse and a lot of violence and was turning to drugs and alcohol pretty early. And when I was 17 years old, I always say that if I had met a military recruiter, I would have gone to war. If I had met a gang leader, I would have joined a gang. And luckily, I met a group of Japanese Buddhist monastics.
Oh, really?
And they, it's a long story, but they ultimately took me under their wing, and I ended up spending a year and a half living in monastery with them for the first 6 months, actually walking from Massachusetts to New Orleans on a spiritual pilgrimage to retrace the Middle Passage and to begin the process of healing from the scar of the enslavement of African peoples. And then ended up living a year in their monasteries across Nepal, India, and Sri Lanka. And
oh, really?
Yeah, so that was my introduction, because this was a Buddhist order that was really committed to nonviolence and social change work. And so my introduction to this work was really at this deep intersection of spiritual practice and social action. And so for me, those two things have never been separate, but it's also, taken me many, many decades of being involved in social justice work to carve out that little space for myself where I can be my whole space, my whole self, and really practice spirituality and social action as a form of spiritual practice.
Yeah. How old were you when you walked across?
I was 17 years old.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I told my mom, I was bored. I heard about it a week before it started, and I told her I'd check it out for a week, and I left home for a year and a half.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive. Really impressive. But I mean, right now, for instance, it's interesting. There is a group of monks walking across this country, a peace march. I'm sure you're aware of it. Are you?
I don't think I am.
Oh my God. It's a wonderful thing they're doing. I don't know what Buddhist sect particularly they're from, but the interesting thing is they have a beautiful dog with them, and I'm a real dog person.
Awesome.
Okay, the dog is walking. He's got a little coat and the whole thing. Oh, yeah. Somehow we get you so you can see what's going on here.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
But let's see. In the legacy that I was so fortunate to be part of, I'm not even sure. I mean, you know who Ram Dass is, I'm sure.
Of course.
Yeah. So his guru, my guru, is Neem Karoli Baba. So there was one time, soon after I actually got there, I had been in India for about 6 months. So I spent about a year and a half just doing, similarly, just what you did, except I didn't do the march. And we went up to a place in India, it's called the Kumaon, Uttarakhand, called Kosani, which is this beautiful town right in front of the peaks, these peaks that were in this particular area, Trishul, Nanda Devi, and so on. And we ended up at a Gandhi ashram. Now, of course, I knew who Gandhi was. And of course, I appreciated everything that I did hear about him and nonviolence and what he did in terms of moving India into the next part of their history. But Ram Dass was committed to the depth of what Gandhi really offers. And he shared that. And so that gave me, so suddenly I had a different perspective. Mm-hmm. We actually ended up in an ashram. It was a Gandhi ashram in Kosani that had this beautiful library. It's where he wrote one of his books. I don't remember which one. Mm-hmm. And we all would go in and sit in silence or chanting mantras or something in this particular room, which, it had a vibe, and we imbibed on that vibe. I mean, it was pretty amazing. So, yeah. I just think that he became a figure. Ram Dass translated it to his audience, translated what these ideas were. And in your there's a great thing in terms of in the book about just the reality of which way this can go. You can use this for your own self-interest in terms, I'm doing this, but what are you really doing? What have you accomplished within yourself to be able to do this without attachment, without anger, and wrong thinking. That's what I call wrong thinking about how to approach just Gandhi's, very, very profound insights into what peace really means for an individual and for, society. Yeah. Can you talk about that in relation to your work?
Yeah, well, I think most people, when we think of Gandhi, we think about the mass mobilizations and like the political revolution that he led. But if you study the work of Gandhi, I think it becomes very clear that the external facing work that he did, all of the protests and the civil disobedience, which was revolutionary. Like Dr. Martin Luther King said that Gandhi was the first person in human history to take the love ethics of Jesus Christ and show that the same love ethic can not only change one heart at a time, but can change societies and can change the world. And so that work that he did was revolutionary. But if you really study his writings, you see that external facing work was just the external facing manifestations of a much deeper inner process. And, I've had the privilege to be mentored by many elders from the civil rights movement who work very closely with Dr. Martin Luther King. And that's actually largely my professional background is as a Kingian nonviolence trainer and trained in Dr. King's philosophy. And Dr. King also said one of the principles of Kingian nonviolence is avoid internal violence of the spirit as well as external physical violence. And that the work of nonviolence has to start by looking at the ways in which we hold internal violence of the spirit, that unhealed anger, hatred, resentment, delusion, as well as just our unhealed traumas, and understanding how all of that is the source of external violence in the world. And so, yes, we do need these social movements. That's so much of my work, is to understand the role of social movements in creating a more just world. But all those social movements, if we're not grounded in some sort of inner work and introspection, a lot of the violence that we claim to be wanting to change out there gets replicated in our own work and in our own communities.
Yeah. And this is something in his talks, Ram Dass talked about this all the time. If you go out there and you're trying to make a change, engaging in social action, and you have within you this anger, this feeling of separation, that there's an us and a them, which you talk about in the book, forget about it. I mean,
That's
he
right.
said, look, you got to keep working on yourself and keep doing what social action you are called to do.
Yeah, and it's that us versus them worldview that is so easy to slip into, especially when we're engaged in political action.
Mm.
When we are over here and there's a line of riot police that are getting ready to tear gas you right on the other side, it's really get easy to get into that us versus them worldview. But I've really come to understand in the teachings of nonviolence and Buddhism and all these things have taught me that it's that us versus worldview, us versus them worldview that is at the heart of what is destroying our planet, right? It is the ultimate delusion of separation because it deludes us into thinking that we are not interdependent creatures.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, let's speak more to that. I mean, that is the core of everything.
I
And
believe so.
so you start to think, well, okay, what do we do to transform ourselves so that we are not holding on? We are not holding on to this feeling that we are so separate. I'll even say so separate because understanding that, I mean, we met a being, there was no separation, and it was extraordinary to behold this kind of a thing. So we're not, this is a very advanced kind of a thing. We're just talking about, hey, you're not so separated. Just
That's
think,
right.
talk about that.
Well, a lot of my work is ultimately grounded in healing being the central goal. And the etymology of the word healing is about bringing us back into wholeness, right? And
Mm.
completeness. And when you talk about, like, I do a lot of individual trauma healing work, both for myself and support communities and trauma healing. And so much of the work of trauma healing is about integrating all of the different fractured parts of ourselves, right? Like, I
Mm.
had a really traumatic childhood. And for many, many years, I kind of banished that memory, banished that part of my experience and ignored it and pretended it didn't happen and just refused to think about it. And so much of the work that I've had to do in healing my own traumas is to integrate that part of myself and to make myself a little bit more whole, right? To remember that the 5-year old, the 7-year old, the 10-year old version of me that experienced so much harm and so much pain is a part of who I am now. And to not
Mm.
pretend that those things didn't happen.
Mm.
And so when we talk about collective healing, it's a similar process of what are the parts of our collective species, our collective body that we have banished, that we like to pretend is not a part of us, that we like to pretend that our liberation is dependent on us beating those people over there, right? And I think only when we can remind ourselves that even the people who are causing so much harm in the world is a part of our collective body. Like, if my finger is hurting, then it is not a skillful attempt to heal for me to like chop off my hand just because my finger is hurting. And I feel like oftentimes that's what we try to do. There are individual people that are causing harm, and we try to banish them and pretend that they are not part of our interdependent universe. But that's the same thing as trying to chop off my hand just because my finger is hurting, right? And so how do we hold individuals who are causing harm accountable for their harm, for the choices that they make, while also reminding them that they belong to something so much larger than themselves? I think that's ultimately the goal of nonviolence. And for me, the goal of social action and social justice movements is to remind us that we belong to each other.
Mm. That's part of our foundation, by the way. It's love, serve, remember.
Mm.
Remember the divine in all of it. By the way, here's Ram. I mean, we're talking about this, and you just expressed it, basically. But here's Ram Dass's new book.
Oh, I haven't seen that. There is no other. The way to harmony and wholeness. That's beautiful.
And we just,
That's
yeah,
exactly
so,
it.
yeah, it's exactly it.
And
Yeah.
to me, that idea of oneness can sound so cliche and cheap in some ways, but
Yeah.
it is the foundation for almost every spiritual wisdom tradition in the world. It is the foundation for me that I've come to understand of the teachings of nonviolence. And even the most advanced forms of science is starting to show that as the ultimate reality, right?
Absolutely. That's His Holiness, the Dalai Lama,
Yeah.
has those monks at Emory College or
Yep.
University in Atlanta, and they are using scientific methodology to prove out what these people have
They've been saying
studied
for
and brought
hundreds
to
and
the
thousands
fore.
of years.
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. So vulnerability,
Yeah.
everybody understands that word. Some people, it feels a little queasy because vulnerability, ooh, boy, I could be taken advantage of, or, I can't let my defense mechanisms down, and so on. So this is the fierce vulnerability. It's funny, Ram Dass is the movie made about him and his stroke, Fierce
Saw that.
Grace. Yeah. So yeah, talk about vulnerability, and this is kind of like, to me, that word and the way that it is used by people. A lot of the times some of the time at least, with negative, context.
Absolutely.
You know, Sharon Salzberg in a thing. Sharon is
Yeah.
Vipassana. So she was with us in a retreat, and we were talking about love, and she goes, love is a difficult word. A lot of people, I didn't say most people, but people tend to think of love, that means you're weak.
That's right. No.
And it's the opposite of the reality of what it is. I think vulnerability has that kind of false
It does,
connotation
yeah.
too.
I think a lot of these important words, nonviolence, can also have
Yeah,
that connotation. But one of my favorite quotes by Dr. King, of which I have about 50 of them, is when he says, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic." And that ultimately, in order to create social change, we need to combine the forces of power and love. But in terms of vulnerability, I've done a lot of work with incarcerated people in the United States, and have had the great privilege to watch them move through incredible healing in their lives and go from some of the most hardened people who have experienced and perpetuated some of the worst forms of violence you can imagine as a species, and then coming out on the other end as some of the most compassionate, dedicated peacemakers I've ever known in my entire life.
Really?
And so much of that work, I really, and this is true in my own trauma healing journey as well, my own growth and healing journey. But the moment one person in a room is able to model vulnerability, it just opens up space, a possibility of transformation that didn't exist just 10 seconds prior to that. When one person opens up with vulnerability, just the possibilities that opens up in terms of our capacity to heal is transformative. And what I'm trying to do in the book Fierce Vulnerability and the work of the Fierce Vulnerability Network is trying to do is to take those lessons and bring them into social justice movement spaces, where so often our social movements are responding to really important issues, whether it's the climate crisis or attacks on migrant communities from ICE or all of these important issues. But we so often lead with this "we are here to shut things down" mentality. And in order for us to heal, one of the things that we say in Fierce Vulnerability is that injustice is not a political thing. It is a manifestation of our collective trauma. And if injustice is a manifestation of trauma, you can't shut it down any more than you can shut down a trauma response. Like, you can't go to a traumatized person and point our fingers and say, you need to stop doing that. But in a lot of our social movements, that's what we try to do. And so in Fierce Vulnerability, we ask this question, we may need to tactically use our bodies to shut down the construction of an oil pipeline or a coal-fired power plant or whatever it is. But what would it look like for us to lead with a spirit of, we're actually here to try to open things up? And what if instead of yelling, we cried? And what if instead of leading with, we are here to demand this piece of legislation, we led with a message that said, we are here because our hearts are breaking and because we are afraid for the future of our children and we don't know what to do? If we led with that sort of vulnerability, could it actually open up possibilities for transformation and healing that wouldn't be there if we're just yelling at the other side?
Yeah. Boy, that's really, Kaza, that's so right on. It's amazing. Very difficult, though.
Very difficult. And it requires us to do a lot of healing and spiritual preparation as ourselves as movements, right? Before we go out into the protest, which goes back to what you started with, is the importance of our own spiritual practice.
Yeah. Hey, can you tell that story? It's just reminding me. The story of the woman who her, I believe, 13-year-old son was murdered.
Oh,
And she
yeah.
decided she wanted to go to the prison and encounter the murderer. It's
Yeah.
pretty phenomenal. I mean, even you say, I don't know where this person got the, you know,
It's one of the
stuff to do
most
that.
magical moments I've ever experienced in my life. This was many years ago. A woman named Cynthia reached out to an organization that I'm a part of called the Ahimsa Collective. And she reached out to us because we do these things called VODs, which are it's called victim offender dialogues. They're dialogues between incarcerated people and the people that they harmed. And Cynthia reached out to us because she wanted to have a dialogue with one of the men who was convicted of murdering her son many years prior to that. And so we met with Cynthia and we met with Richard, who's the man who's currently serving a life sentence in Old Folsom State Prison for murdering her son. And 6 months later, we were able to bring them together in a dialogue. And I remember walking into the prison with Cynthia, and my co-facilitator, Bonnie, sat her down and we kind of like grounded her in the space that the meeting was going to happen. And I walked around the corner and went to the holding tank where they were holding Richard, and he was, already shaking. And I sat down next to him and tried to, do my best to ground him. And I asked him if he was ready. And, he kind of laughed and said, I'm as ready as I'll ever be. And he stood up and he turned the corner into the hallway and he saw Cynthia at the end of the hall. And the moment he saw her, he just collapsed in tears. And Cynthia saw that and came out of the room and just opened up her arms and welcomed him in an embrace that felt like it lasted for an hour. And then they sat down and just talked for 6 hours. And there was a moment, there's so many moments, but the one moment I'll share is there was a moment when Cynthia was holding Richard's hands. And she said, I had a dream that I needed to hold your hands because these are the hands that took my son's life away. And I need to have a different relationship with them.
Wow.
And it was, and I share this story with their permission regularly as part of my work because I need us to remember that there's a way in which Cynthia and Richard both are incredibly unique individuals, right? But there's also a way in which they're actually not. They're very human. And the work of healing that Cynthia and Richard did shows us the possibilities and the potential of resilience that we all have as a species. Like, if those two are capable of that depth of healing, then our species is capable of healing our deepest wounds at the individual or at the collective level. And I think it's a story that really shows me how amazing and beautiful and strong and resilient we are as a species.
Yeah. Wow. Can you imagine? I mean, it's hard to imagine, You're in that facility and the man who murdered your son is walking towards you and falls apart.
And you embrace him.
And you embrace him.
Yeah. And both, again, there's a theme here. Both Richard and Cynthia were very clear that it was their spiritual practice that allowed them to get to that place.
Really?
Yeah,
how so?
Absolutely. They're both indigenous.
They are.
And so they both said, we spent 6 months talking to them one-on-one before we brought them together, and they were both very clear that if it weren't for their spiritual practice and spiritual community, that they would have fallen apart under the weight of all of that pain that they both experienced.
Well, that's amazing. Don't you have a relationship with indigenous community, bloodline?
I do, yeah.
Do
I've been really grateful. The first time, I mentioned I was born in Japan. The first time I came to this land, Turtle Island, was when I was 3 or 4 years old. It's actually my first earliest memory. And my mom has always had a relationship with indigenous elders in this land. And so we came to visit. But
she is Japanese, your mom?
She's Japanese, yeah. We're all Japanese.
Wow. Yeah.
But yeah, she was friends with a Hopi elder named Thomas Banyanka. And so we came to visit him.
Yes, that's fantastic.
And then later on in my life, I had an indigenous stepfather. And so we used to go up north every summer and spend time on the reservation. And we used to spend time sleeping in the basement home of Chief William Commanda. who was the band chief of the Anishinaabe Nation and the holder of the Seven Fire Prophecies wampum belt. And so I grew up hearing the story of the Seven Fires Prophecies and the Hopi prophecy from the very elders who like taught it to the world. And so I feel really grateful for having had those experiences from early on and continue to be in relationship with indigenous communities. So, yeah.
Wow. That Hopi prophecy is sort of occurring, is it not?
Well, both the Hopi prophecy and the Seven Fire prophecy both speak to this moment. I think both peoples, the Anishinaabe people, the Algonquin people, and the Hopi people, were very clear that those prophecies are speaking to this time that we live in now. And that in this moment, we have, as a species, have an opportunity to make a choice. And the choice is to continue down a material path, which will lead to nothing but destruction. But we also have the opportunity to go back and to go back to a spiritual path. And if we're able to make that shift, then we can rebuild the world anew and have lasting peace. And, you know, I use the word spiritual practice and spirituality all the time. And I just want to pause by saying that I use that term broadly speaking. Like, to me, being in nature and looking at the ocean as a spiritual practice, like it's anything that reminds me that I'm part of something so much larger than myself as an individual, right?
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be some sort of like religious dogma, or you don't have to go to temple or monastery to practice it, but any practice that reminds us that we are part of the natural ecosystem, part of our cosmos, I think is what I consider to be spiritual practice. And I think that's what we need to be doing in our life right now, right? Is to remember that we are part of our natural ecosystem and to go back to those ways of being and ways of living.
Yeah. We were lucky we got modeled by this being. The first thing he said was, Christ and Hanuman are the same.
That's right.
Which,
yeah.
First of all, I'm Jewish, never mind anything else. But the installation of complete, your purpose here is service. Your purpose here is compassion, love, mixed with the power of it's hard to find a word, righteous action.
Mm-hmm.
In the Ramayana, which is one of the major holy texts in India, it's based on Ram. God came down and he was an avatar and he became king and everything, and it was a period of time where everybody knew that the king knew that God was the king, which isn't always the case. Anyhow, he was. To tell the whole story would be about 3-4 podcasts, but the reality is his wife got abducted by a demon, Sita, and he went and he was going to conquer the demons, and he was on the shore, and he said to the goddess of the ocean, can I have your permission to go over you into Sri Lanka? And his brother said, are you crazy? You're actually the Lord. You don't have to ask anybody for anything. You can do. And he said, which is key to this, what I'm trying to bring out. He said, I am doing what is proper behavior on this earth, and in India, that is called maryada, proper conduct. So that having some relationship with proper conduct, I think, is important in the whole warp and woof of what we're speaking to now around social justice, social action, and practice, and spiritual practice. Yes, just sitting in front of I sat at that place, Kosani in India, in front of this extraordinary mountain named Trishul, which is like Shiva's trident. It's threefold. And absolutely, it is something that I would recommend everybody do. But yeah, the reality is something needs to happen, and in terms of having some kind of also not being taken by the belief in your stories, your thoughts, and all of that stuff. And how to do that, there are practices that you can use to get there. I think that's important. It's not even spiritual. It's as you say, connecting to that place that we are all part of, that one,
Yeah, no, I oftentimes joke that one of my spiritual teachers is the astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh, really?
Because when I hear him talk about the cosmos and the history of the galaxy, it leaves me with the same sense of awe and mystery and inspiration that I'm left with at the end of a meditation retreat or some sort of ceremony and ritual. And even as we were talking about, science teaches us that 15 billion years ago, before the Big Bang, there was no such thing as time and space, and the building blocks of every single thing that have ever existed in this universe and every single thing that will ever exist in the universe all existed on a singular point. Right. So this idea of oneness it's also a scientific fact that we all came from the same source. And how do we remember that in each moment when here I am sitting across from a computer screen looking at what looks like a separate individual? Like, how do we remember this in our day to day?
Yeah.
That's the practice.
Yeah. That's well, we're doing it right now, Kazu.
Yeah, indeed.
We are fortunate, very fortunate.
We are.
Yeah, let's talk about, one of the other, of course, central themes in the book is trauma. And, there's the individual trauma, and then, of course, the collective trauma. We just did a course walking each other home this past fall, which had every day there was a different theme in that general topic. And I have a good friend who works with the death and dying, had worked with Ram Dass many, many years ago. And he, we were just talking like you and I are right now, and he said, because we were asking him to do something around trauma and individual trauma. He said, yeah, that's one thing. What about collective trauma? Look what is going on now. The loss that is going on in every sector of our lives, socially, politically, environmentally, psychologically. I mean, it's really, he said, and that we can address that collectively, but, trauma, and I think you even say it in the book, people think of trauma. Okay, you were just in a car accident and had this... But trauma comes from the smallest incidents in one's life, especially when one's younger. Yeah, talk about that, Kazu.
Yeah, so one of the main theories in fierce vulnerability, as I mentioned, is that injustice is a manifestation of our collective trauma. And so if we are going to create a just world, what we need to do is to understand how to heal collective traumas. And we do that, one of the theories that I'm putting forth in the book is that I'm not the only person that says this, but that the universe is a fractal universe, right? Like, we live in a fractal universe. And so the same things that we do to heal individual trauma has to be applied to trauma healing work at scale. And so a lot of the work of fierce vulnerability is understanding, because we have so much amazing science now about how we help individuals move through trauma. And so how do we take those lessons and apply them to scale? So one example is when I was young, as I mentioned, I came from a pretty traumatizing childhood. And for many, many years, the story that I had told myself is I had a really difficult time when I was a kid, but then I moved into a monastery and I had all these amazing experiences and I healed that wound. I'm over it. I'm glad that it's over. But in reality, I never actually processed those traumatic memories. I just kind of hit the reset button and started a completely new life. And so all of that pain I was dragging with me, and it was impacting every single relationship in my life. And if we zoom out of the fractal and look at the nation state that we both live in, the United States of America, we have this tendency to say, oh, slavery, that was 500 years ago. It was so long ago. We're over it. We've healed. We've moved on. But in reality, we've never talked about that legacy. And so it is weighing on our collective body in the same way that my early childhood trauma was weighing on my individual body, that the collective trauma of this like early childhood experience that we experience as a collective body, as the United States of America, when we were still young, we experienced these traumatic things. And so that still weighs us down. And so all of the racial injustice and the racial strife and the racial harm that we witness today is the direct result of the racialized trauma that we have been carrying around for hundreds of years. And so when we talk about racial justice, it's not just about us like yelling and chanting in the streets and demanding legislation that pours money into reparations, but it's about healing our collective trauma, right? And so how do we use social movements to get us to recognize that we are still living out the legacy, the karma of America's racialized trauma? And how do we use social movements as a modality of collective trauma healing? And so that's a lot of the kind of experiments and the questions that I'm exploring in the book.
Very difficult. Keep saying that, but very difficult.
Yeah, liberation is not an easy thing. Healing is never easy.
It's funny. This just occurred to me. I did a podcast with a good friend of mine, David Silver, the other day. We're both big, you could call devotees of this incredible Lama, one of the most incredible ones in the last couple of 100 years. His name is Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, and he had 4 sons. 3 of them are, one died. 3 of them are still, amazingly robust in sharing their teachings here in the West in particular. And so we were just talking about the reality, because they express some of the work that they did to become realized in some way. I wouldn't know. And you know what they talked about? Yeah, he did 20, 30 years of his life in caves. He did, something similar. Yeah. These people, to accomplish what they set out to accomplish was to transform the I, basically, into a we, they were relentless. So now you start to think of, okay, what do we do about this collective trauma? And what's the kind of work that we need to do to get to a place where you can do what that woman did in prison? It's a different situation, but she opened her arms up. We can't open our arms out to very little because we ourselves are so polarized.
Yeah, and I think especially a lot of people of my generation and younger sometimes don't recognize the importance of that rigor. Like if we are talking about something as big as collective liberation, that's not going to come easy. And I remember I wrote about this a little bit in my first book, Healing Resistance, that my mentor who really trained me in nonviolence was one of the leaders of the civil rights movement and was on Dr. Martin Luther King's senior staff. And he was part of the lunch counter student sit-in movement in Nashville, Tennessee. And the student sit-in movement had chapters in hundreds of locations across the South. But out of the Nashville chapter of the student sit-in movement emerged Dr. Bernard Lafayette and Diane Nash and Dorothy Cotton and C.T. Vivian and James Bevel and all these people that would become the backbone of the U.S. civil rights movement. And when historians look back and ask, like, what was so unique about Nashville that it produced pretty much the entire backbone of the civil rights movement in a movement that had hundreds of chapters? What was special about Nashville? And they all agree that what was unique about Nashville is that the leadership of the Nashville chapter of the lunch counter sit-ins underwent a nonviolence training that lasted almost 6 months before they were allowed to do their first protest. And it was that rigor, right, of doing something over and over and over again and trying to practice staying grounded in love, even as they were facing abuse, is what allowed those students to become national leaders that built the civil rights movement.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, and so like, whether we're talking about social change or personal healing or collective healing, these things require a dedication to practice, right? And I think
Yeah.
it's sometimes difficult for us who, we live in such like a fast-paced society where everything has
To
to happen
say the
immediately.
least.
And yeah.
You also say, I believe we are fooling ourselves if we think we can transform the world simply by individual life choices. This hits hard in the stomach, Kazu. If we all buy organic produce, drive electric cars, meditate and do yoga every day, and are kind to our neighbors and commit to the vulnerable work of healing ourselves, the world will change, one heart, one mind, one person at a time. Now, yeah, give me the feedback about
Yeah.
that.
Well, I
You
should
even say
say
it's a dangerous worldview. Okay,
it,
so
it,
you're
it,
being
it
very
is. I try to eat organic produce, and we have an electric vehicle, and I try to be kind to my neighbors. And I don't
yeah.
meditate and do yoga every day because I have a young child, but I try to as much as possible. And I am very deeply aware that I am not doing any of those things because I feel like I will be liberated because of it. Right? There is no such thing as individual liberation in an interdependent world.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the things that I talk about over and over in the book is that the idea of individual liberation is a myth. And if we are doing these things so that we can feel better about ourselves, we are living in a delusion because it doesn't matter how healthy I am. If I walk out of the door and my neighbor who is homeless and hasn't eaten in several days sees me coming out the door and decides to mug me because of his pain, then how free am I? How liberated am I? And so I'm very clear that the work that I do for me to be healthy and for me to be grounded and for me to be able to integrate my individual traumas is only so that I can be in a better position to contribute to collective healing. And if we are not seeing the connection between individual healing and the possibilities that it opens up for the roles that we can play in collective healing, then we're always going to be spinning our wheels. There is no such thing as individual liberation in an interdependent world.
Which is the definition of the Bodhisattva vow.
That's right. Yeah.
Right? I will not go anywhere till everyone is free. That's what that is.
Yeah. And I think ultimately we can't go anywhere until everyone is free, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. But it's very, very difficult to live into those words.
Yes, it is. Especially in a world that is so fractured and so politically polarized.
Yeah.
Like I'm 45 years old now. I know that 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was a lot easier to sit down at a table with people who had political differences. And now, even just being in the same room with people who have opposing political views feels like it is such a high tension, high stakes thing. And so it is difficult, and that is the work.
Yeah. Another thing that I keep referring to Ram Dass because I'm living it every day in terms of the foundation that we have. But he said, and it's in this book that I just showed you, There Is No Other. He said that in the 60s, when we opened up through psychedelics mainly, but through just a different lifestyle, that everything was possible. And we opened up, and we had those years of, hey, let's put some acid in the water. We'll get everybody on board, that kind of naivete. He said that in the end, what we did, we were part of it back then, contributed to the reactivity by the public, mostly, of course, the right wing who had a different purview around individualism and the collective, shall we say.
Yeah.
They strongly reacted and strongly pushed back. And he said, I feel like that's contributed to where we're at right now. That was part of the thing. Yeah. Amazing.
That is really interesting to hear and interesting to notice that, like, at some point, truth can't help but emerge.
Yeah.
And just all of the new sciences that are starting to emerge in the last 10 years about the healing potential and the power of plant medicine and psychedelics, and a lot of cultural shift is starting to happen. So I am glad to see that.
Yeah. Hey, there's some great quotes. I love quotes in
Me
the
too.
book. And this, yeah. And especially with you, I'd never heard of these people. So it's so great to meet people that way. Here's one by Alex Patakos. And in parentheses, you have sort of. What does that mean? I love that, though.
Well, why don't you share the quote? Because
Yeah,
I think
I'll
it's a
share
quote
the
that many
quote.
people are probably familiar with.
Yeah. Oh, really? Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our happiness. This is such a great quote, Kazu.
Yeah.
Who is this guy?
Well, so a lot of people will hear that quote and will probably say, "Oh, I know that quote. That is a quote from Viktor Frankl." Viktor Frankl, who's the psychologist who was a psychiatrist who was a survivor of the Holocaust and wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
And he's oftentimes misquoted as the person that said, between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is our freedom to choose. It's a beautiful quote, but that quote, from what I understand, was there was a guy whose name you just read who studied the work of Viktor Frankl, and one day was in a library reading a book and said that he saw that quote in some book that he read in a library and thought that that quote perfectly described the work of Viktor Frankl. So when he wrote a book about Viktor, he used that quote saying this quote perfectly describes Viktor Frankl's work, but apparently it was not a quote of Viktor Frankl.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so I really love quotes, and I'm a stickler for being able to reference the right people. So I always do a little bit of research on them.
Bottom line is a great quote.
It's an amazing quote.
Yeah. Here's something else I wanted to bring up because it hit me personally. My trauma is deeply interdependent with my stepfather's own unprocessed trauma. This means the person I am today is deeply influenced by every person who ever hurt my stepfather. I think a lot of people could read this and go, and relate to it. And I can relate to it. I had trauma in my family, which I expect was more mental trauma. It wasn't beatings or anything like that. It was screaming. It was trauma, whatever.
Yeah, definitely.
And then, actually, when I read this, Kazu, I'm thinking, thinking back, what about his parents? What about the people he was influenced by? What about the fact he was, in World War II, flying a bomber for the Canadian Air Force, for the British Air Force, through the Canadian thing, and came back and it's just him and one other person.
That's right.
That lived through this thing. Talking about PTSD.
Yeah.
They didn't have that, that was not something that anybody, he's just depressed from the war.
Yep. Shell shock, right?
Shell shocked. That's it. Yeah. So I had that in my face, the whole time. And I realized the trauma that I had.
Mm-hmm.
And this I've told a billion times on podcasts, but he actually came to India to see my brother and I under the guise of, I wonder how they're doing, because I told him we were with this incredible being. And he came, and when he first sat down, a bunch of stuff happened, but Neem Karoli Baba, we called Maharaj, he looked at me and said, did you give him the medicine? I said, yeah, he had a cold. I gave him some aspirin. He said, no, the yogi medicine that Ram Dass gave me. I went, acid? And my father went, LSD. Well, he did take it, and he had a whole death trip, and his life completely changed after that, including our relationship. So this is beyond really great karma, shall we say, that, that happened. But it did not, the main point here, it did not just completely evaporate. What it did is we both then had a vantage point that we could deal with this. So that was,
Yeah, well, I remember years ago reading, I think it was Ken Kesey, right? The electric Kool-Aid acid
Yeah,
test.
yeah,
And I was talking about how things like LSD can open the door, but we still have to step through it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's funny that quote from the book that you're just reading. I was just listening to a podcast yesterday with Vanessa Andirotti, who is the author of a book called Hospicing Modernity. She used to go by Vanessa
Oh,
Machado
yeah,
de
yeah.
Oliveira. Yeah, beautiful book. And she was saying a very similar thing about how, we like to pretend that we're interdependent with the stars and the sun and the moon, but not interdependent with the sources of violence. And if interdependence is a thing, then we are interdependent with everything that exists, whether we like it or not. And so I think that in that part of the book, that's kind of what I was talking about, is that my being, everything about who I am today, is deeply interdependent, not only with all of the wisdom teachers and the guides and the people that taught me and the people that love me, but also with the people that hurt me and the people that hurt them. Right. And to acknowledge that we live in an interdependent world, and that means that our liberation is bound with the liberation of all people, whether we like them or not, whether they have hurt us or not.
Yeah. Extremely important. Yeah. Here's the quote from her, by the way. I happen to, make a marker on it. We tend to only legitimize what makes sense in parentheses, inarticulated meaning, what we can understand through chains of words. As a result, a whole world of unsayable possibilities is dismissed as meaningless. That's her, right? Vanessa Machado de Oliveira Andreotti. And she has sounds like a book that I'd like to get. What's the book's name again, Kazu?
Well, the first book is called Hospicing Modernity, which is an incredible book. And she has a new one out called Outgrowing Modernity.
Okay. Producers, you listen to that, because we got to link that up when we have the show notes, when people go to the show notes. So that heads at the delusion of knowing. This is such a great topic, really. It is so elemental to us.
Yeah.
We all think we know one thing or another. Could be the smallest. I'm the worst offender. The delusion of knowing, and you talk about getting into you might as well talk about it. It's personal. Getting into a conflict with your partner. Talk about that.
I don't remember which conflict I was talking about in the book.
No,
I've been in a relationship long enough.
Not so much the subject of it, but the fixing
of it. Well, just
it.
that, when I get into a conflict with my partner, immediately what happens in my mind most of the time is that I know that I'm right. Right.
Yeah,
I know that I'm right, and I know that she's wrong. And once I, quote unquote, know that I'm right, I stop listening. I stop being curious. I stop being empathetic. And all I'm doing is trying to convince her why she's wrong. And that has never been effective in healing our relationship. Right. And the whole delusion of knowing thing is about acknowledging that we are living at a moment in the history of our species that Joanna Macy calls the Great Turning, that the Hopi prophecies and the Seven Fire Prophecies talked about, where the earth is going through such a mass transformation that it is impossible for us to think about it with our intellect and know what to do. And it is actually that worldview that if we think long and hard enough, we can figure out what levers to pull and to control the changes that we need to see on this planet. It is that worldview that has got us into this mess. And so liberating ourselves from this moment in this world means letting go of the certainty of knowing and being okay being in the mystery of it, and just listening, asking the right questions and listening with our hearts and taking one small step at a time. And even if we can't see the entire pathway and the entire staircase between here and collective liberation, to just trust that if we listen deep enough, maybe the very next step that we need to take will become illuminated to us. And that's all we need to know.
Beautifully said, Kazu. Do you know a Roshi named Roshi Bernie Glassman? He passed a number of years ago.
I don't think so.
Oh, he had he was one of, he'd be up there, top few people in the West here, proactive around social change.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a bakery in Brooklyn, I think, and that was a big part of what he was doing, feeding people. He was running Ram Dass did a homeless retreat with him where you have nothing, you're just out on the street to experience that directly.
That's beautiful.
And so on. His major thing before he died was not knowing. Not knowing.
Yeah.
I mean, it was exactly as you expressed it. I mean, he was a very wise individual, right? But he understood what you just expressed quite well. Yeah. I mean,
there's beauty and wisdom in not knowing, right? And accepting that some things are not knowable.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Oh boy. We're kind of at the end here of the podcast towards another great quote. When you were born, you cried, and the world rejoiced. Live your life so that when you die, the world cries, and you rejoice. This is Kabir, one of the great poet saints of, I don't know, the 15th, 16th century or something.
Yeah.
He's also amazing. And Maharaja used to quote, one of the few people he would quote was Kabir. So, yeah, when I saw that, it just reminded me. And where are you going next?
Well, the next big thing in my life is at the end of March, we're launching a 3-month virtual fierce vulnerability training that is going to be a kind of onboarding of sorts for people who want to be part of the Fierce Vulnerability Network. We'll be joined by Francis Weller and Cairo Duolingo and Ma Muse and a bunch of other people. And, I'm transitioning from doing less like external facing one-off events about my book and wanting to do longer engagements that actually builds community around the concepts in the book. So if folks who are listening to this want to be in community where we're exploring some of these things, I really want to recommend that you check out that training and
online, Kazu?
It is going to be online. Information is on my website, kazuhaga.com. It will be online, but everyone who's going to be part of it will be placed in small pods of no more than 7 people that will hopefully be local. And so we'll be inviting people to meet in person as you go through this virtual program as well.
Oh, that's great. That's terrific. Yeah. Wow. So KAZUHAGA.com, correct?
That is right.
Okay. And we'll have it in the show notes. We'll have links to, of course, Fierce Vulnerability, which has just exceptional wise thoughts throughout. I really think so. And then we'll get in that link to Vanessa's book as well. Actually, if you can send me over, that would be great. Sure. Send me over a link.
No problem.
And anything else that you want to share, please do.
No, I mean, I just think we are living in an incredibly exciting time. Obviously, these are really horrific times with pandemics and climate crisis and war and genocide and all these things happening. And it is an incredible opportunity for us to heal. I've learned through my journey and through all of my work that the deeper the trauma, the deeper the possibility for healing. And so as all of these collective wounds of our collective trauma are emerging out into the open, we have an incredible opportunity to heal our collective wounds right now. And so I'm excited to be here with people who are interested in this journey, and just grateful to you for having me for having me on the podcast to talk about some of this, and let's do this. It's all possible.
Yeah, that I like that positivity, because people can get very negative easily today. So thanks for being here, Kazu. And great to meet you and get to know you a little bit. Everybody, this is Mindrolling on Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com. And we have a whole plethora of amazing people An amazing podcast. So we will see you next week, and thanks again.